Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. And we find ourselves sitting here a couple of days before Thanksgiving. If you're watching live, it's Tuesday night. The phone-in number is 640-3091. I'll be very happy to hear from you. We've had our elections now a week or so ago. We had let me see, actually 2 weeks ago from tonight. And then we had our recounts last week, so we now know who we have and the set of characters we have to bring us forward, starting in whatever date in January that they will start. We'll have a new board, a new school board, and a new board of mayor and aldermen, and of course a new mayor. So I'm very hopeful that we have a new day starting in January. The signs aren't always good, so we'll. But I am hopeful. Until such time, I had a long conversation with a friend of mine on the topic of the new school board and its makeup and whether there was reason for hope or not. And I'm holding my ground on this idea that we will have a more productive board going forward. So I'm hopeful that's the case. Some people read the tea leaves and see something else. I'm going to wait. I'm not going to try and do tea leaf reading, but rather look at the needs of our schools and where we are, and hopefully that we can get to a new place. I'm particularly hopeful because of the fact that Joyce Craig is mayor. And let me say that it's not as though I expect that Joyce Craig can suddenly solve all ills. Just like Mayor Gantz was not and is not solely responsible for the things that happened under his watch, good and bad. But he did get to set the table. And so he is the single biggest driver of it, and equally that will be the case with Joyce Craig. I don't think that she, on her own, by some because she's some miracle worker or by force of mind or because she's anything kind of superhuman, that she's going to be able to change things. But she does have the opportunity to set the agenda, set the tone, and I think that might be very important, because one of the things that people have been most critical of, I think, in the outgoing school board has been some level of dysfunction between them. I don't know I think they went on a retreat at some point. They were talking about going on a retreat. I think they went on one to get together on some Saturday or something. I didn't pay enough attention as to what exactly they did, but the idea was that they become more collegial and etc. And then, of course, they came back from, or after at least, to talk about that retreat, or if they went on one, there was no evidence of it once they came back. And sometimes I think it comes to a stage on a board where there's need for change and a shift around, and I think that's exactly where this board is. So that's the basis of my hope going forward, that we can get some good things to happen. I think that Dr. Vargas has done a pretty good job up until now. He declared himself at the last meeting that he would be happy to stay for another year, to have his contract renewed through the 2019 school year. So and I expect that will happen. I know that at the last school board meeting, which I actually didn't see myself, but I know that the question came up about it, was raised by Mr. Gerard, asked the question if he was going to be staying on, and he said he would like to. And then the other thing that happened as part of that conversation was that a review of his work thus far would be undertaken, and a report issued to the school board is for them to agree to a contract renewal of his at the December meeting, as I understand it. But I think it was a positive thing that came out of there was that it was decided that each of the 14 school board members would give a review of the Dr. Vargas's accomplishments or where he had what he had done thus far. But that different from previous years, there would be no anonymous reviews done. So his review would be that each school board member would sign their own review, so that people wouldn't be able to make comments anonymously, etc., but rather they'd have to stand over that which they wrote. So I think that's probably a good thing. If anybody was worried about people being intimidated and unable to speak their minds, I think there are avenues to do that if something rose to such a serious level that you had a serious complaint about a superintendent. I think that's something that could be taken on separately and not necessarily as part of the review. And I like the idea that if you're going to write a review for the man and his job, then do it out in the open and write what you think, and be big and bold about it, and tell the truth. Don't be afraid to do so. And that goes back to whoever's sitting at the top table, right? This is why I think that having Joyce Craig chair that board will have an important effect. Now, I just want to touch off a topic on that regard, because I have been, during the Gatsis period in office, I supported and proposed that the mayor of the city not be the chair of the school board, and I'm less concerned about it. I think I will be as it goes on with Joyce Craig, but I still think that's a good idea. I think that the mayor has a full-time job in the corner office. I think the schools in the city and the Department of Education is a large and complicated department. I think you have a chief executive there in the form of a superintendent who's one of the highest paid, second highest paid perhaps person in the school in the whole city. And so you bring in an executive to manage that function, and then the mayor gets to oversee. So I don't know who might be chairing that board. I haven't heard any proposals to actually introduce a chairperson or to make that change, so I don't expect it to happen in the short term. But it is important that whoever's sitting at that top table, if they can introduce a note of positiveness, and then also, or positivity, and then also just not be as allowing of the ongoing negative conversations. I think yes, people should be allowed to speak, and to speak freely, and to speak in the fullness of everything that they want to say. And so long as what they are contributing is something of value and important, you may not agree with what the other school board member is saying, but if it's not just voluminous and just going on and on and on, if it actually is of some substance, then fine. But my hope would be that the meetings would be run in a way that people felt free to speak and were encouraged to speak, but were encouraged to speak in a sensible and I was going to say complimentary, not complimentary at all. I don't mean that at all, but just in a respectful manner, and then bring things to decision sooner. The idea of people speaking on something and then speaking again, and then through the chair, Madam Chair, they go again, and through the chair, Madam Chair, they go again. It's like, we've got 14 board members, and 3 of you have done all the talking, and so now we're going to bring this matter to closure, and we're going to move on to the next topic. We'll bring it to a vote. I hope that we see some evidence of that, and truthfully, I don't know how Joyce Craig is at the mechanics of running a meeting, but it's a specific talent, and I hope she has it. I know that there's a level of sort of benevolence from her that will be helpful, and whether Mayor Gatsis was deliberately wanting to appear like a bully sometimes, it seems that from his own comments, when he was asked on WMUR about the perception of him of being a bully, he talked about a bully as someone who takes your money, etc. So I think perhaps there was a disconnect in Mayor Gatsis's mind between what his perception was, his public perception, his perception by those who sat around him, and how he viewed himself. And so for right or wrong, there was that element there. And so I'm hoping when that goes out of the room that we'll have a different type of conversation. I just hope it doesn't lead to an ongoing, this just speaking off the cuff, on and on and on. And I've referred many times to the idea of the school board being an executive session, that you get the agenda, you read the supporting documentation, you make your mind up about what way you're going to vote on a topic, and then you vote. And if you have questions, then ask the questions before the meeting. And so the debate then at the actual school board meeting should be a very succinct and deliberate, and let it be as contentious as it needs to be. There are going to be 14 people there. There's a wide variety of opinion on that school board. But then, make your point, make your counterpoint, make your point, make your counterpoint, bring it to a vote, and move right along. I'm hoping that's where we get to with this board. I do want to touch off of we had this terrible event in Goffstown. This is Tuesday if you're watching this later in the week, and this event happened on Sunday afternoon, where a young man, a student from Memorial High School, lost his life in a shooting on Sunday afternoon. And I know nothing about that, and have no facts other than the fact that a young person from Manchester died. And so whatever else this may mean in the future, and we learn in the fullness of time what exactly happened and why it happened and how it happened. There's a story there that will be told, and there's obviously there's another person. There's a shooter there that we haven't heard about who that person is, but in the end, my point, I guess, is that it is a couple of points. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for everybody involved, and it really goes to the point, I think, that we ought to be mindful of our young people, and careful of them, and loving of them, and appreciative of them. And given that Thanksgiving is 2 days away, it falls under the heading of one of the things we need to be thankful for. So my heart and prayers go out to that family of that young man and his friends. I wasn't at there was a vigil at Memorial High School, which was very moving. I talked to some of the young people who were at it on last night, and I was told 300 or 400 kids showed up for a candlelight vigil, and the choir sang one of the young man's favorite songs, which was the Beatles' "Hey Jude," and which is such a nice piece. So I'm sure it was a very moving time. I hope all the young people at Memorial, but at all our other high schools too, that it gives them pause for thought. We lost three teenagers in New Hampshire this weekend. One in the shooting, and two in car accidents. And life is precious, and young people by their nature are adventurous, and they need to learn. And in order to learn, they sometimes make mistakes. And so I just think as a community we need to embrace our young people and understand them, and understand what their needs are, and we should do everything we can as a society to help them to move from childhood to adulthood with the best guidance possible. And that takes education in its broadest sense, the school district and its teachers and its administrators and all its staff and support staff, and then the police and our entire community. So I have to say I'm thankful that our young people are are as good as as they are, and that we have the number of wonderful young people that we have. And so I was thinking coming into today about the idea of Thanksgiving and all the things we have to be thankful for. And I spend a lot of time on this show talking about the things that we do not have, and the things that we ought to have. But this is Thanksgiving weekend, and so it's important to be thankful for all the great things that we do have. I've always been on the horns of this dilemma about how do you point out the deficiencies in our school system, which are huge. How do you do that without sort of tearing down the edifice and attacking the edifice? And so I'm hopeful for now in this period between, the eye of the storm, so to speak, this period between boards when the old board has got one more meeting to have in December, and then we'll see. I think it's only one meeting. It might be two, but I think it's one. And then we'll have a new board in December, and then let's see what we get from there. And I will be very thankful if we actually have a constructive board that can minimize the things that they disagree about and move on with other things. The whole idea that there's a division in the school board, I just object to that. I don't think that this school board will be any more or less divided than other school boards. I think it's an opportunity. It's all about how you deal with those divides. And if we look at the people on the school board, there's a great difference between, say, the two aldermen at large. Rich Gerard at one side and Nancy Tessier on the other. Two very different people with very different worldviews, very different political views. And you have some new members coming on there, like Jimmy LaHoo, who's replacing Erica Connors, and I liked Erica Connors, and I'm sorry to see her go from the school board. But Jimmy LaHoo is a new face with who's been having his voice heard on education matters, and over the last few years, he narrowly lost the last time out, and we'll see what happens. I'm looking forward to hearing Jimmy LaHoo's perspective when he's on there. I'll have to be reaching out to him, and we've talked once or twice about getting together. But it'll be interesting to see what he has to say. I know that one of his from his literature and from talking to him, I know that he is a big supporter of MST and of the whole idea of I don't want to put words in his mouth, but sort of preparing people for the trades. The idea that not everybody is college bound, and that we need to do a good job of making sure that we're reaching all kinds of kids, and that bringing kids into trades and all the rest of it. And I have a pretty nuanced view of that whole thing, because I think clearly we should be, first of all, what is unacceptable is to have dropout rates at the 25% level, or whatever they may be, depending on which school you look at in Manchester. But the dropout rate is unacceptable. So whatever we can do, but we shouldn't be, in any sense, I'm not saying anybody's doing this, but it's important not to in any sense dumb down anything in order to improve the dropout rate. That wouldn't be the right response. I think that the right response would be to find the thing. It comes back to the word education. These kids need to be educated. So let's go back and find the thing that they are interested in engaging on. If a regular curriculum is not something that that's particularly meaningful to them, then let's find a thing that would make them that would get them going. I use the example, a few things that, and I know I fall back to Hillside too often, and people have accused me of that, and we all, it's what I know, so it's why I use it. But I use the example at Hillside Middle School of when we the PTO supported getting a twin table, whatever it's called, to do DJing, a DJ setup, and there were a bunch of kids, 4 or 5 kids who wanted to use the DJ equipment, and they learned to use it, and just were very excited about it. And I don't know whether these kids loved everything else about school or not, but they certainly loved their time using the DJ equipment. And I remember being in there that summer a couple of years ago, or 3 years ago now, when we were repainting the school and the gym and refurbishing things as the parents were doing at that time. And these young, and as it was, I think it was all young men, these 4 or 5 young men would come by. It was July, on a beautiful day in July, and the sun was shining, and they wanted to come by so they could use the DJ equipment. And as a result of that, just from that one thing, we ended up with like a after school DJ class where kids wanted to learn to use the equipment and play music, and then there's the whole thing that goes on from there. There was the whole audio visual package that went with the notice boards to put up all the notice and the news in the school, and kids got into that. So there are kids who are going to thrive in a classroom with a teacher at the top of the class, and 20 kids in a room and learning whatever it is they're learning. And then there are lots of other ways and lots of other topics that people might be interested in. And so I'm not against any of that. I think that's great. I think the danger is that we lurch in the wrong direction. And what I worry about when people start talking about work ready or ready for work education for work, I dislike that whole sort of topic. Because in the end, we first of all should be educating kids, and then getting them ready for work is a secondary consideration, not the other way around. Because if you turn it the other way around, if you were running schools in Manchester in the 1850s, then you teach kids how to spin a spindle or manage a spindle, and how to climb in and out under the flywheels at the mills, and then you'd send them all out to work at 9 years of age, because that's what was required, and that's not education. So this idea that a kid who wants to be a plumber or a carpenter or an iron worker or a welder or all the other trades, that somehow they're not interested in a full education, that's something to think about. Those who are proponents of the trades, etc. I think, yes, let's have that, but let's give the kids an education too. There's no think about this. Why shouldn't the plumber come into your house to work on your plumbing? Why should he not or she not also have perhaps a love of classical music, or a love of jazz, or a love of Zydeco, or a love of traditional music, whatever it might be? Or why maybe they besides being a plumber, they're also they're deeply immersed in American literature, or maybe they like to study philosophy or psychology, or maybe they've got a strong love for American history, or world history, or astrophysics or astronomy. It's very limiting and belittling and small-minded to sort of think that some kids just aren't into their kids aren't into them book learning education. I think is born of ignorance, and I don't mean to be accusatory. I'm just saying that there's a different way of viewing this. You can educate kids so they're educated to be engaged with the world, of the world, and thoughtful, citizens of the 21st century, and then be a great plumber or carpenter or whatever they may be. Another word of caution around the trades would be this: is that the trades today are not the trades that were there 30 years ago. If you're a plumber today and you show up to fix somebody's plumbing, you're likely to encounter climate control systems in a building, certainly in commercial buildings. So the idea that it's a boiler and all you have to do is be able to clean out a boiler and reset a burner and then weld a bunch of copper pipes together, that's not what plumbing is anymore. So you just like even auto mechanics, right? An auto mechanic, it's not about changing mufflers. I mean, people have to do that too, but there are skills now involved, and if you're going to become a tradesperson today and you don't have an understanding of technology and the impact of technology, plasters go in a room and they set up a laser to do laser sightings and laser leveling, so they know where all the levels are. They're not over there anymore. I don't mean they don't know, they don't have a level, but the idea of holding a level up against the wall and drawing a pencil line from the yellow pencil behind your ear, that's not how even something as basic as plastering works anymore. So there is a need to educate kids. What we really should be doing is exciting them in the areas that they might like to be excited about. So, somebody who likes woodwork, maybe they like architecture, maybe they'd like to be a draftsman, maybe they'd like to be a creative artist. So what we need in our schools is more and not less. We need more imagination, a wider offering, a wider understanding of what education is. And that's the place where, and I don't mean to single out poor Jimmy LaHoo tonight, but like these are conversations, and I'm hoping to have him and anybody, by the way, who's watching this show, any school board member who would like to come on this show and talk, please, it's an open invitation from me. Call me, and I'd be happy to slot you in now that you all know where you are and what you're going to be doing. So. But this is where the conversation, if there was no confrontation about, Jim O'Connell wants to throw money at it and he wants to just keep on throwing money at it, and no one's ever said this to me, but I can imagine them saying, and he thinks every kid's going to go to college, so it's all about doing, AP psychology or something. That's actually not true. But what is true is I will fight for that all day long, because I do not support the dumbing down of education, and that the idea saying that not everybody needs to go to college, therefore we don't need to have the programs in place to bring our kids to college. That would be a fundamental problem, because what we have today is we have an education deficit. So when we look at our business and the future of our country, but certainly of our state, we have a deficit of education. So we're lucky because in the state of New Hampshire we benefit. We have a high level of our population in the state of New Hampshire are people with college degrees, and we've got a high level of people in our population who've got postgraduate degrees, and that's a big plus for us. But a lot of that is because of people who live in New Hampshire and work in Massachusetts, or who bring their degrees here with them. So we have a deficit in that regard. I was listening to something yesterday or today, and they were talking about the state of Ohio, and the governor of Ohio is pushing a long-term project where they're aiming to get to a point. When I say long term, I'm not talking about 20 years, but over the next 3, 4 or 5 years, they're talking about getting to a point where 65% of students in the I'm sorry, did I say Wisconsin? It's Ohio. Yeah, so in the state of Ohio, that 65% of students graduating high school would go into university, or maybe more than that go to university, but that 65% of them would have university degrees, and that's what the state of Ohio thinks will be necessary in order to be successful in this current century, and it clearly is the case. We need engineers, and we need doctors, and we need vets, and we need astrophysicists, and we need software developers, and we need engineers, and we need great writers, and we need great creative artists. We need all the talents we can get, and in the big scheme of things nowadays, even a good high school education is just a shadow of what's available once you walk in through the doors into the ivory tower. and it doesn't always have to be an ivory tower. You can go to MCC, Manchester Community College, or NHTI up in Concord, or any of the other third level education institutes available to students in the Greater Manchester area. And there's just a whole other level of opportunity available to them. So this idea that we should, in order to make sure that we have kids getting the offering that they need everywhere, that we somehow have to dumb down the thing that we have to do best and most. That's just not a very wise position to be in. So if we can do all of it, we should do all of it, not take from one in order to give to another. Now, under the heading of take from one in order to give to another, I have to tell you that I was absolutely floored last week by a vote that was taken in Concord, Senate Bill 193, which is a bill that would allow state taxes to be used to pay for students to be homeschooled, or to go to private schools, or to go to religious schools. And it's sold under the idea of school choice, and it just simply is not so. There will be a fight about this in the spring, when, or maybe as early as late January or February, when this goes to the floor of the House. It's already passed by the Senate, and now passed by the Education Committee on a 12-11 vote. And the 12th vote, one Democrat voted. Some Republicans voted against this terrible bill. But one Democrat crossed over and voted in favor of it. And, it was maddening enough that Victoria Sullivan, who's a Republican member from a Manchester constituency, voted in favor of this. But she had always been in favor of it anyway. That was to be expected. And I wish she wouldn't, because I see it as an attack on Manchester public schools. But to have Alderman Barbara Shaw vote in favour of this piece of legislation was absolutely flooring to me. I couldn't believe that she would take that vote, and because it had been the Republican caucus on that committee had been in a state of disarray the previous week, because they did not have the votes to pass this piece of whatever out of committee, and they'd been playing with it for 9 months, and they went off a week ago last Wednesday, or 2 weeks ago last Wednesday, and they went off and spent an hour and a half in their chambers, just as a caucus of the Republican committee members, trying to hash out between themselves some set of compromises, some diminution or dilution of the bill that would make it at least palatable enough that they could get their own members to vote for it. And they weren't able to do it, and they came back into the chamber, and in a big embarrassment had to admit to the room full of waiting people who had spent the morning waiting to hear the result of the vote after 9 months, and they had to admit defeat, and they didn't have the votes. In the intervening week, they tweaked the bill. They changed the definition of some people who, if you were over 3 times the federal poverty level, then you wouldn't qualify for the bill. And so that meant that, for instance, the parents of people at Derryfield School in Manchester, as an example, presuming that most people who spend $30,000 a year on a child's elementary and high school education per year probably are not at the federal poverty level. And so the argument that I'd used against this bill, which was that it allowed the SUV driving class to take money out of public schools, that could be taken away. So they worked for a week to change the bill, and they cobbled together a group of 12 out of the 23 to vote for it. And one of the people they cobbled onto that group was Alderman Barbara Shaw of the City of Manchester. And and this is not personal about Barbara Shaw. She's been around a long time. She's well able to defend herself, I'm sure. But for me, and at this time, I can say that I was appalled, appalled by that vote, and the lack of. I just think that I really need to hear from Barbara Shaw a resounding, categorical answer to the question why she voted for it. Because I asked her the previous week. I went to Concord for that committee meeting, and while they were in recess, I walked up to the table to where she was sitting, and I asked her right there about the bill and the future of the bill. And she gave me no indication that she intended to vote for this bill attacking public education. She had offered that she had voted for it just to be allowed to come to table, just because she thought, that it was something that people wanted to discuss, and she wasn't going to oppose that. And so that's how we left it. And then I find out. I found out afterwards that she voted for it. But given that this is a very, very, very partisan bill, it is seen by those who like it. There are people around the country looking at it and seeing it as a crack in the wall between church and state, and a knife driven into public education, and that we have this opportunity now, that if this stands constitutional review and court review, if it withstands it, that we will end up with the ability of private and religious schools getting the benefit of the people's taxes, and so Barbara Shaw, unless she's living in a bubble, has to know that this was a national conversation, that this bill had been written about in Washington D.C. and in New York, that it was a topic of conversation on the conservative blogosphere, that they'd been eyeing this for a long time, and they continue to, and will see it as a big win. And there's no doubt in my mind that Governor Sununu, if you look at his literature when he's running a year from now for re-election, whatever bulleted points he'll have on his cards that will be mailed in and out of your doors asking you to vote for him, one of the big bullet points on that list will be, and I fought for funding of private schools and the support of, he'll call it, school choice. So for Barbara Shaw then to take a vote in that atmosphere, and by the way, I don't say just because something is difficult to do that you shouldn't do it. What I'm saying is that if Barbara Shaw has some really compelling reason, if she can look me in the face and the other voters and the people of the city of Manchester, if she can look them in the face and say, let me tell you why I voted for this bill. I found a compelling argument in the following. It was clearly the best thing for education in the state of New Hampshire, and it was good for Manchester for this reason. Frankly, I don't think she can do that. And the phones are here, and I will be talking to her on it. I don't want to talk about somebody behind their back. And again, it's not about. I'm not personally attacking Alderman Barbara Shaw. If people can appreciate the difference here, if you're seeing me as someone who's disappointed and annoyed, absolutely I am, and disturbed by this, and I use the word appalled by this. I'm all of those things, but I haven't heard Barbara Shaw's reason for voting for it. I can think of no good reason for doing it, but I know that the most conservative amongst us would look at it and say, this is a school choice issue, and therefore now people can use it for school choice. But we all know that we should know that that's all nonsense anyway. What we've seen happen across the country is that school choice is generally an excuse for a number of things, some of them particularly distasteful. So school choice is a code word in some communities for pulling the white kids out of mixed schools. So that's the school choice solution. If you go to some states in the United States, you'll find that the public schools is where is where the unenfranchised bring their kids, and then anybody who can afford it takes their kids, as part of white flight into private academies, and of course they'll have their token, 5% or 3% of Asians and African Americans, etc., and they'll hold that up as something wholesome, and it's not something wholesome. It's something that stinks. And I'd hate to see the same thing gain hold here. So I'm kind of appalled by it, because that's it at its worst. I know that in actuality, I have many friends who have their kids in private schools, and there are some good private schools. And as I've said here before, though, there are also some terrible private schools. I met a young lady recently from a charter school, a public charter school, who had been through a charter school, and then ended up coming back into the public school system, and came into the public school system as a sophomore, and had been in a charter school through the end of elementary school and through middle school, and came into the public schools in Manchester, the actual public schools, and was totally unprepared, and was originally put in level 1 classes, and was able to do the work there, was moved to level 2 and found the work too hard in level 2, was frustrated, and quit school at the end of 6 months because she didn't understand any of the work that was being done in level 2 classes. Can you imagine that poor young girl, what might have happened had she been in public education all the way through and not been through this particular charter school that she went to, which I know to be a desert of learning. So it did her no service whatsoever, and that young lady is, 19 today, and she's out working in a minimum wage job in the catering business, and so that's what we did for her. That's what the system did for her. So I also, I have other cases that I've seen of people who, I know another family who've been a combination of homeschooling and charter schooling, and the results, they may not admit it, but because they're always trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, but the results have been atrocious for that family, because in the end they didn't come out of there, and not that it's the only measure, but there's no reason why these kids couldn't have gone on to good universities, and they had all the things they would have needed except for a proper education. And so it's not as though every charter school is doing that. Some of them are fine, but some of them are atrocious, and some of the homeschooling is just terrible. I talked to I know some people who homeschool who are a very small minority in my worldview, who are just happen to be capable people who know what they're doing. But let's be simplistic about it for a minute. The idea that anybody can be a teacher and anybody can be an educator is a nonsense. There's either the 4 years that kids spend in university and the time they spend getting a degree in early childhood education or all the various subsets of education. Either that's all a farce and it's just a game they go through and they spend their money on, and they come out and they know no more than they would have otherwise, and they're no better at teaching a kid than they would have been if they'd just gone and born one themselves and sat at home at the kitchen table with an ABC set teaching them. It's just a nonsense. Kids need educators, and all you have to do is go to Walmart or Hannaford or walk down Elm Street or go to Hampton Beach in the summertime and just look around you, and try telling me that the average person on each side of you it would make a good homeschooler. Some of them clearly might, and some you would agree would be an absolute disaster, and some might be able to make a go of it. And so to throw kids into that is just it's just very problematic. And then when I take the people, the paranoid and the lunatic fringe, who are sort of convinced and convinced by people who keep saying this, that our public schools are ungodly. That's my favorite term. That they're ungodly and that they're institutes of indoctrination, and that they're imposing some secular pro-government views on our children, is all of that is just falls under the heading of paranoia and a psychotic view of the world. But the people who believe it, and so they have their kids at home and they're teaching them some ridiculous version of American history and of American politics and of philosophy and civics that bears little relationship to reality, and I see that all the time, and it's just shocking to me, because we need a well-educated population. We need kids who are ready to take on the mantle of the set of challenges of the 21st century, and it's not going to be found by people sitting at home teaching the 3 R's and showing people how to sew and bake bread. And I'm all for kids learning how to sew and bake bread. Don't get me wrong. One of my sons, his favourite class in middle school was woodwork. I think it's great. But in the end, we need well qualified, well educated young people. And now, when I talk about a garbled view of the world, I was listening to somebody today talking about Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving is it's a wonderful American tradition, a wonderful holiday going back to the time of the Pilgrims, etc. But this gentleman was a Native American, and he was talking about the alternative view of Thanksgiving, and I don't want to be Debbie Downer and ruin your looking forward to Thanksgiving, because as I said at the top of the hour, we have a lot of things to be grateful for, and that's this idea of Thanksgiving is an important one, and I don't want to dilute that in any sense. But if you actually read the history as it's been handed down to us of the experience of the people at Jamestown in Virginia and at Plymouth Rock, the whole history is false. There's so much untrue about it all. This idea that the Native Americans are Indians, welcome to the white man with great benevolence, and they all partied together, and it was a happy time, and as somebody was in some book found this piece where a textbook in an American school talked about how the American Indians set aside land and moved elsewhere to allow the white settlers to settle in a new land, and all of it is just none of it is there is no truth. So this gentleman today was talking about the realities of what happened in the, how these colonies were originally settled, and the besides the issues of disease, the susceptibility of Native Americans to European diseases, etc. But even things like the common cold and the devastating effects they had upon them. But the terrible tragedy of the things that were done to the native peoples, in the name of so-called progress. These people didn't come here to to till the land and build farms and create nice, peaceful settlements, all singing Kumbaya around the fire on Sunday evenings. There was a great deal of animus and animosity and cruelty, and a dealing with the native peoples as though they were subhuman and savages. The whole idea of scalping and taking scalps was a European invention. This whole idea. So my point is that people can teach a history which is sort of, a made up version, kind of a Pocahontas, as though she were the Disney World view of Pocahontas and John Smith, and they end up falling in love under the trees in this beautiful sylvan atmosphere. Which of course is all a nonsense, and it does a disservice to everybody. It does a disservice to the people who have been here since time immemorial, the native peoples of the United States, or what would become the United States, the native peoples of America. It does them a huge disservice, but it also does a huge disservice to the settlers themselves. To the vim and vigor and the rough and toughness, to the people who the blood, sweat, and tears, the dying, the crying, the fighting, the losing, the cold, the freezing, the hunger, the starvation, the meanness, the joy of in little things. There's all, the world is a much more complicated place than this, storybook version of the early United States, and yet this is the kind of tripe that is handed out to people, and then it becomes, of course, even much worse, because as you go through history, they then turn history on its head, and you have people at home teaching their kids, false narratives around slavery and the reality of slavery, and whether slavery was really an American issue at all, and I've heard the greatest load of tripe spoken about these topics, and we have, some of the people I know who are homeschoolers have got these very strange views, uninformed views of American history, and if you're that uninformed, it's no longer sort of on the passive side of the equation. In other words, it's no longer that which you're not teaching your kids. It is the danger of the things that you are teaching them, because what you're teaching them is false. You're creating lies on which they're going to base their thinking for the future, and that is just that right there is a travesty. And that's what gives us and will lay the foundation for social upheaval and social unrest and an inability of people to live together in the future, because people need at least we'll all differ in our political views, and some will view it one way and some people will view it, life would be pretty bland if we all marched in lockstep to the same master. It's exciting that people have differing views, but those differing views should be born of a common set of facts. And then the interpretation of those facts, and then from there, then extrapolation out into what that means about today and what would it mean for our future. And that's where robust thinking, deep thinking, considerate men and women who are well educated will engage in respectful, albeit animated and sometimes angry, etc., debate about how we move this nation forward. But if there are people sitting at the table who have just a thwarted, bizarre view of the world, just as bizarre as those who believe that the world is 5,000 years old, that humans and dinosaurs existed on the planet at the same time, that there's no such thing, that global warming is not a man-made issue, that coal is the answer for the future of energy, and all this non-fact-based ignorance. If that's, the problem with those views is they have a real effect on the decisions we make about how we move forward and how we will be successful as a nation. And so all of this comes back to the fact that the number one prerequisite of a successful economy in the future is to have an educated population. And in order to have an educated population, we can't be doing it with pockets of excellence here and pockets of atrociousness over here. We need to have at least have this minimum standard available to everybody of a robust public education in the public good that is well funded, well resourced, well thought out, with representing the broad spectrum of views, political and social and economic and scientific, etc. And that's what we need in order to create a robust economy in the future. And we're doing a pretty woeful job of that today with the attacks that we have on our public education. In the great state of New Hampshire, students leaving public universities in the state of New Hampshire have got the highest level of student debt of any students in the United States. Let me actually restate that, because it's not just public universities, all universities. New Hampshire students leaving university in New Hampshire have higher student debt than any other set of students in the United States. That's a shocking figure. You know, when you've gotten to then on the other side, we have the least well-funded university system of any university system in the United States. Another shocking, we've gotten to the absolute in all these things. We're no longer saying we're in the bottom 5% or we're in the top 5% worse for this or highest for that. We're on our own. The little old state of New Hampshire has claim to these sorts of statistics, these sorts of facts. And then to compound it, we have a Congress, a Senate, a President who are proposing legislation through this supposed tax reform, which is really just another attack on the common good. We're actually going to further defund education through this process, and some of it is so mean it's unbelievable. So if you're not paying attention, one of the things that was fought for by Olivia Snowe Senator Snowe in Maine over the last number of years was this allowance, and it was written into law just in 2015, but is now proposed to be abandoned, which allows school teachers to deduct up to $250 per year with receipts of products and items they buy for their classrooms and their schools. That will be done away with, because that would be. Tell me how that makes sense while you're giving $1 trillion away to the top 1% wealthiest Americans. Also, student loans, so that student loan repayments would no longer be tax deductible or allowed for tax purposes in our taxes, making student loans more expensive, or the ability to go to school more expensive. No money to improve Pell Grants, even though they're at a historic low in real terms over 25 years. There's 3 places in which this supposed legislation attacks the middle class. And then fourthly, for education, it also gets rid of the tax-free status for endowments for universities, which universities use to give funding to students who can't afford to go there, and to pay for graduate students to do graduate work. Those are 4 areas of attack under the current Republican bill that's being proposed. So this is an outright attack on education once again, and on the middle class. People need to resist. People like Barbara Shaw need to grow up, put on their big pants, learn that they're fighting in the real world, and stop with the attacks on public education. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a great Thanksgiving. Enjoy it. Enjoy time with your families. I hope to do so with mine. My heart goes out again to the people who lost a young son in Manchester this week. God bless them. And God bless us all. And we'll see you in a week's time. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good night from Jim O'Connell.